Edward Thornley was the kind of man who liked to make an impression. At 38, he was tall, broad-shouldered, and always sharply dressed in tailored suits. His thick, dark hair was combed back neatly, and he carried himself with a confident smile. People in the office sometimes whispered that he must have had an endless supply of money. He drove a sleek black car, bought expensive watches, and bragged about the luxury apartment he was investing in. However, Edward's colleagues and friends had only seen the surface of his life. They did not know about Claire, his gentle, devoted wife who stayed at home with their 2 children, Emily and Aaron. They also had no idea about the cheap, cramped apartment Claire and the children lived in. Even more shocking was the fact that Edward had started building a luxurious home in another part of town, but not for his family. He was building it for his mistress, Lydia. Lydia was in her mid-20s, a fashion model with a taste for high-end restaurants, designer shoes, and exclusive parties. From the moment Edward met her at a corporate event, he was enchanted by her charm. She played hard to get, letting him chase her while offering teasing smiles and subtle compliments. The more she teased him, the more he wanted to please her. Soon, he was paying her rent, buying her gifts, and promising to construct a dream penthouse just for her. Claire, his wife, had once been the center of Edward's world. She remembered a time when he was more humble, more caring. They had married young, sharing dreams of building a life together. "We'll have a nice home, enough savings, and we'll never neglect each other," he used to say. But those promises had faded. Currently, Claire and the children lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that often had plumbing issues. The water heater would break every few weeks, leaving the family to bathe in cold water unless she called a handyman they could barely afford. The walls were thin and the neighbors' music kept them awake at night. Still, Claire put on a brave face for the children, who were only 6 and 8 years old. She tried to shield them from the hardships, but they were clever enough to sense the strain. Late one evening, as Edward stepped inside the small apartment, he was greeted by the squeaky floor and dim lighting. Claire, wearing her worn-out slippers, glanced up from the kitchen counter where she was preparing a simple pasta dish. Emily and Aaron were doing their homework at a small table near the window. "Daddy!" Aaron exclaimed, jumping up from his chair, face lit with excitement. "You're home." Edward forced a smile as he set down his expensive leather briefcase. "Hey, champ," he replied, patting Aaron on the head. Emily hesitated, but got up from the table to give her father a hug. "How was your day?" Claire asked softly, as she took the pasta off the stove. Edward shrugged. "Long meetings ran late," he answered curtly. But in truth, he had spent most of the afternoon at the construction site for the new luxury apartment. The developer had shown him the latest design for the marble floors, the gold-plated fixtures, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Lydia had insisted on high-quality materials, each more expensive than the last. Edward had agreed to every single request. "I was hoping we could talk about the lease soon," Claire murmured, stirring the sauce in a small pot. "The rent here might go up again, and the heater still doesn't work properly." Edward frowned. "I've told you before, I'm handling it. Work has me under a lot of pressure these days." "Money doesn't grow on trees, Claire." She lowered her eyes to the pot, feeling the tension in the room. The children looked at each other, sensing that the conversation was going somewhere unpleasant. They returned to their seats quietly. "Sure," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward cut her off. "Let's talk about this another time. I'm tired. I need rest." He stormed out of the room, leaving Claire and the children feeling uneasy. That night, as Claire put Emily and Aaron to bed, she kissed their foreheads and tried to smile. "Sleep tight," she whispered. Emily clutched her teddy bear. "Mom, is Dad okay? He seems upset." Claire patted her daughter's hand. "He's just tired from work, sweetie. Don't worry." In her heart, Claire suspected something else was going on. Over the past few months, Edward had become distant, moody, and far too preoccupied with his phone, texting, making quiet calls he didn't want her to overhear. She tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, telling herself that he was just stressed. After all, he had always provided for them, even if it felt like less and less each year. But her mind circled back to a curious item she had found in Edward's briefcase a few weeks ago, a glossy brochure from a prestigious architectural firm. The image on the front showed a shimmering building, something clearly out of their financial range. She'd never worked up the courage to confront him about it directly. That night, she lay awake in bed, listening to Edward's soft snores and staring at the cracks in the ceiling. She wondered how much she still truly knew about her husband. The phone calls, the sudden interest in fancy real estate, none of it added up to the man she'd married years ago. Meanwhile, across the city, Lydia admired herself in her mirror, thinking of how close the penthouse was to completion. She imagined the marble floors, the plush furniture, and the sweeping views of downtown lights. She thought of how she would throw parties for her fashionable friends. Edward had promised her the world, and she liked hearing him beg to make her happy. Yet Lydia was no fool. She sensed Edward's desperation to maintain his double life, and she intended to squeeze every drop of luxury out of it. "If he can't deliver, I'll find someone else who can," she told herself, shrugging on a satin robe. Then she glanced at her phone, noticing a missed text from him. "I'll finalize the contract next week. Don't worry." Smirking, Lydia typed back, "I want the best of everything. No skimping on the finishes, or I walk." Edward, of course, would comply. He had become fixated on pleasing Lydia, no matter the cost. And so, as the days passed, the secrets grew. Edward's exhaustion deepened. Claire's suspicions grew stronger. And in a quiet corner of the city, a lavish penthouse soared toward completion, shining like a jewel among the towering skyline, waiting for a moment that would soon unravel Edward's entire life. A week later, Claire sat at the wobbly wooden kitchen table while her children ate toast and scrambled eggs before heading off to school. She had dark circles under her eyes from another restless night, but she forced a bright smile as she offered them a second serving of juice. "Eat up, Emily, Aaron. You both have busy days ahead," she said. "Yes, Mom," they replied in unison, though Emily was more focused on braiding her doll's hair, while Aaron stared at a colorful cereal box on the table, wishing their morning routine was a bit more exciting. Claire was used to making the most of what they had. She rarely complained, even when money was tight or when Edward was absent for days at a time. Yet inside, she felt an ache. The day before, she had tried to talk to Edward again about their living situation. He had snapped at her, saying she needed to be more grateful. Later that morning, when the kids had left for school, Claire went about her daily chores. The apartment building was old, and the paint in the hallway was peeling. Her neighbor's dog barked constantly behind a flimsy door. A single flickering light bulb illuminated the corridor. Claire sighed as she exited, a basket of laundry under her arm. In the laundry room, a dingy, cramped space in the basement, she encountered Mrs. Harris, a kindly woman in her 60s who lived 2 floors above. Mrs. Harris wore a sympathetic smile, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. "Morning, dear," Mrs. Harris greeted. "You're up early for laundry." Claire set the basket down. "Yes, I like to get it done before the machines fill up." Mrs. Harris nodded, then lowered her voice. "Claire, I can't help but notice that you and your husband, well, you haven't seemed very happy lately. Is everything all right?" Claire fidgeted with the edge of a pillowcase. She debated how much to reveal. "We have our ups and downs, like any family," she replied, forcing another tiny smile. Mrs. Harris gently patted her arm. "I'm here if you ever want to talk, dear." "Thank you," Claire said quietly, avoiding eye contact. Her conversation with Mrs. Harris left her feeling uneasy. She hated the sense that others might pity her. She remembered a time when Edward was not just loving but also transparent, carrying her in his arms across the threshold of their first, modest home. "We'll build a better life," he used to say. Now, she felt as though their entire marriage was overshadowed by unspoken secrets. That evening, Edward came home earlier than usual. He looked tired, but not as defensive or irritable. Claire hoped it was a sign that they could finally talk. When the children were in their room, busy with homework, Claire approached him. "Edward," she said softly, "can we discuss a few things?" He loosened his tie and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Go ahead," he said, sounding cautious. "We need to figure out the situation with this apartment," Claire began. "The landlord might raise the rent again, and we're already struggling with the hot water." Edward rubbed his forehead. "Claire, I know the apartment isn't great, but right now, I can't afford any major changes." Her heart sank. But you said things were going well at work. It's complicated, he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Then his phone buzzed, and he quickly snatched it up. He glanced at the screen, then looked at Claire. I have to take this. Sorry. He walked into the next room, leaving Claire alone. From the hallway, she could hear him speaking in a hushed tone. Yes, Lydia. No, I promise. I'll have it covered soon. Just trust me. Claire couldn't catch every word, but she heard enough to guess he was talking to someone named Lydia. Jealousy and confusion churned in her stomach. Who was Lydia? And why was Edward promising her anything? She forced herself not to jump to conclusions, but the weight of suspicion continued pressing down on her. After he ended the call, she confronted him. Who is Lydia? She asked, trying to keep her voice from trembling. Edward's eyes flashed with anger. A client, from my new project. It's part of my job, Claire. Don't pry into what you don't understand. His response felt like a slap in the face. She wanted to believe him, but the way he refused to look her in the eye set her nerves on edge. Well, she said, swallowing hard, if it's work-related, maybe you can talk to me about it, so I can better understand. We're husband and wife, Edward. We should share things. He closed his eyes and sighed. Look, I have a major deal going on. It's taking all my energy. I need you to trust me, okay? Everything I'm doing is for this family. One day, we'll live comfortably. You'll see. Claire forced another smile. She felt exhausted, though it was only 8 in the evening. I trust you, she managed, though her heart was uncertain. Minutes later, while Claire cleaned up the dinner plates, she accidentally dropped a fork, which clattered loudly on the tile floor. She stared at it for a second, feeling how that small sound reflected the larger chaos in her life, a quiet upheaval, an incessant clamor just under the surface. Before bedtime, Claire checked on Emily and Aaron. They were whispering to each other in their room. Mom, Emily said, is everything okay between you and Dad? Claire knelt down next to Emily's bed. Daddy's just busy with work, sweetheart. Things will get better, I promise. Why are we staying in this apartment so long? Aaron asked, crossing his arms. Dad always said we'd move to a bigger place with a yard. It's been 2 years. Claire smoothed Aaron's hair. I know, honey. We will, eventually. She kissed them both good night, then closed their bedroom door, clinging to the hope that maybe Edward was telling the truth. Maybe he really was preparing something big for their future. Maybe Lydia was just a client. But the seed of doubt remained. And that night, as she brushed her teeth in the little bathroom, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror, she noticed the faint lines of worry etched around her eyes. She was only 35, but she felt older. With a sinking feeling, she realized that day by day, she was losing the spark she once carried. The worn smile on her face was becoming a permanent fixture. She rinsed her mouth and whispered to her reflection, I have to be strong. Little did she know how much her strength would be tested in the coming weeks, and how the life she knew was about to unravel in ways she could scarcely imagine. Lydia Sterling was exactly the kind of woman who thrived on attention and luxury. She had grown up in a family of modest means, but 1 year of successful modeling in local magazines had opened new doors. She discovered men with deep pockets and shallow hearts who were willing to give her anything in exchange for her presence. Edward Thornley was just another man in the long line of suitors, but Lydia liked him for his ambition. He was older, married, though Lydia convinced herself that was none of her business, and intent on winning her favor. She enjoyed playing the part of the demanding goddess, making him chase after her every whim. Late one morning, Lydia lounged on a velvet chaise in her high-rise rental apartment, painting her nails a glossy red while the city sparkled beneath her window. A knock sounded at the door. Come in, she called, already knowing it was her personal assistant from the modeling agency. Her assistant, a young woman named Camille, stepped in gingerly. You have a casting call this afternoon, and an appearance at the En Vogue event on Friday, Camille said, consulting the list on her phone. Cancel the casting, Lydia said, blowing on her wet nails. I'm not in the mood to audition for some small brand. I only do top tier now. Camille paused. But your manager said. I said cancel it, Lydia repeated, raising an eyebrow. Camille simply nodded, typed a note into her phone, and quietly left. Lydia smirked. She was used to getting what she wanted. Moments later, her phone rang. The screen displayed Edward's name. She picked up and greeted him with a silky, sweet voice. "Edward, darling." "I'll be at the site in an hour," Edward said. "The builders need me to approve the final blueprint for the rooftop lounge." "Will you meet me there?" Lydia rolled her eyes, though she kept her voice pleasant. "I'll come by if I have time. But you know, Edward, you promised top-of-the-line everything. I just hope you're not going to disappoint me when it's time to pay for these upgrades." She heard him sigh heavily. "I'm doing everything I can, Lydia. This apartment is going to be the crown jewel of the city. You'll have your own private elevator, a heated pool on the balcony, and a panoramic view. No expense spared." Her lips curled into a satisfied grin. "Good. You'd better not cut corners." Though she didn't say it out loud, Lydia had her own ways of verifying that Edward was still financially stable. She asked questions, probed about his business deals, and dropped hints that she could walk away. She liked seeing him squirm. An hour later, Lydia arrived at the construction site, wearing oversized sunglasses, a stylish coat, and high heels that tapped against the unfinished floors. Edward was there with the architect, discussing finishing touches. "Hello, gentlemen," Lydia greeted, offering a dazzling smile. The architect, a middle-aged man named Mr. Chong, bowed politely. Edward put his arm gently around Lydia's waist. "Lydia, this is Mr. Chong," Edward said. "He's overseeing the final designs for the penthouse." "I'm delighted," Lydia replied, offering her hand. "Now, show me what you have so far." They moved through the skeleton of the penthouse, stepping around construction materials and scaffolding. Mr. Chong pointed out the large windows, the granite countertops in the open-concept kitchen, and the space for a custom chandelier in the foyer. Lydia's expression remained neutral, even as she took in how extravagant everything was. "It's nice," she finally said, leaning against a railing as they peered out at the city skyline. "But I want it perfect. Edward knows I won't settle for less." Mr. Chong exchanged a quick glance with Edward. Then, clearing his throat, he addressed Lydia. "Ma'am, the budget for the marble floors, gold-plated fixtures, and the temperature-controlled wine cellar has exceeded the original forecast. We need a clear confirmation before proceeding." Edward stiffened. He was acutely aware of how the cost was spiraling. But Lydia's bright eyes turned to him. He had no choice. "Yes," he said. "Approve all of it." Lydia gave a contented nod. Mr. Chong made some notes on his clipboard. As they continued to tour the space, Lydia remained glued to Edward's side. When Mr. Chong stepped away to speak with a contractor, she turned to Edward, her voice low and sweet. "You're going to do whatever it takes to finish this, right?" she asked, sliding her fingers along the lapel of his suit jacket. Edward swallowed. "Of course," he said, though a hint of worry crossed his features. I've just been under a lot of stress." She leaned in, pressing a light kiss to his cheek. "I can imagine. But you're a big boy. You'll figure it out." For a moment, Edward seemed about to confide something, possibly about the mounting debts, the complicated arrangement at home, or the tension he felt each night when he returned to Claire and their kids. But Lydia's phone rang again, and she broke away, picking it up with a languid wave of her hand. "Yes, Camille, what is it?" Lydia said, abruptly ignoring Edward. After listening for a few seconds, she frowned. "Fine, I'll be right there." She hung up and turned to Edward. "My manager needs me at the agency. I have to go." She placed her sunglasses back on. "Remember, no corners cut. Otherwise, our deal is off." Before Edward could respond, she strode toward the elevator. He watched her leave, exhaling heavily. Mr. Chong rejoined him. "You sure about these changes?" the architect asked gently. "They'll cost an additional 30 to 40% more than we initially agreed." Edward nodded, forced a shaky smile. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "Just make it happen." But inside, his thoughts raced. He considered the expansions, the mounting bills, the hush money for Lydia, and his family's monthly expenses. He considered the near-empty lines of credit. "I'll figure it out," he muttered to himself, clenching his fists. Leaving the site, Edward climbed into his black luxury car. He stared at the steering wheel for a long moment, chest tight with dread. As he drove, he felt a sharp pang of guilt. He had just approved thousands more in expenses for Lydia's dream apartment, yet his children struggled in that small, dilapidated rental with no relief in sight. He told himself that once Lydia's place was finished, he could find a way to juggle the finances. The surge of excitement and the thrill of living on the edge almost drowned out his shame. But only almost. That night, he wouldn't see Lydia again. She was busy at a high-profile dinner. So Edward went home to Claire and the kids. The difference between the opulent penthouse in progress and the stained walls of his family's cramped living space struck him harder than usual. He stepped inside, noticing that the living room light was flickering. A faint smell of mold lingered near the bathroom. Claire was in the kitchen again, cooking soup with leftover vegetables. Emily and Aaron were hunched over the table, finishing a math assignment. "How was your day, honey?" Claire asked, mustering a gentle smile. "Fine," Edward said stiffly, loosening his tie. He walked past her, settling onto the couch with a sigh. The children rushed over, each trying to claim a spot next to him. He gently patted Aaron's head and gave Emily a faint smile, but his mind drifted back to the penthouse, to Lydia's demands, to the giant price tag. Claire watched him, noticing the faraway look in his eyes. She wanted to ask him about Lydia, to force a conversation about all the suspicious changes. But her courage faltered. A deep loneliness crept into her heart. In the back of her mind, she wondered, how long can Edward keep juggling these secrets without everything falling apart? Over the next few weeks, Claire's worries intensified. Bills piled up in a small wooden box on top of the fridge. Rent, electricity, water, and a new wave of medical expenses after Emily caught a bad cold. Claire sighed each time she opened that box, carefully organizing the envelopes and noticing which ones were overdue. On a chilly morning, as the children headed off to school, Claire buttoned up her worn sweater and grabbed a shopping list. She only had enough money for basics: milk, bread, some fruits, and a bit of chicken if it was on sale. Walking to the grocery store, she couldn't help but compare her situation to the dream she once had of owning a cozy house with a white picket fence and a yard where Emily and Aaron could run around. Now, she was settling for near-expired produce to save a few pennies. While pushing her cart through the aisles, Claire ran into her friend, Marissa, who had married around the same time as she did. Marissa's hair was styled neatly, and she wore a coat that looked more expensive than anything Claire could afford. "Claire," Marissa exclaimed, giving her a friendly hug. "I've missed you. We never see each other anymore." Claire smiled politely, feeling self-conscious about her frayed sweater. "It's been busy with the kids." Marissa nodded, surveying Claire's mostly empty cart. "How are you and Edward?" Claire swallowed, trying to maintain a cheerful expression. "We're okay," she lied. "Edward is working on a big project, so he's very busy." "I see." Marissa eyed her kindly. "Well, maybe we can catch up over coffee sometime." "My treat." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice." They exchanged phone numbers again, and Marissa walked away, her cart filled with fresh produce and organic snacks. Claire felt a pang of envy but quickly shoved it down. She continued shopping, selecting a package of discounted chicken breasts and double-checking the total cost in her head. Every cent counted now. When Claire returned, she found Edward standing in the living room, fiddling with some papers. It was unusual for him to be home at midday. The tension in his posture gave him away. He was upset. "Everything okay?" Claire asked softly, setting the grocery bags on the kitchen counter. He waved a hand dismissively. "Work issues. The bank is giving me trouble about a loan I needed." She frowned. "What loan?" "It's complicated, Claire," he snapped, gathering his papers. "Just a short-term thing for the business." She studied his face. He looked exhausted, pale. "If it's a short-term business thing, then why are you so upset?" Edward glared at her. "Do you have to question everything I do? I'm under a lot of pressure. I'm trying to make a living for us." Claire's voice trembled. "I just want to understand. For a moment, Edward looked as though he might confide in her. His shoulders slumped. But then his phone chimed. He grabbed it, reading a message, and his jaw tightened. Stuffing the papers into his briefcase, he stalked to the door without another word. "Edward!" Claire called after him, but he was already gone. The door slammed, leaving a hollow echo. She sank onto the couch, feeling tears prick her eyes. The children wouldn't be home for a few hours, and she suddenly felt very alone in the silent apartment. There was no one to share her confusion or fear with. Even her mother, who lived 2 states away, only knew that things were tight for them. Claire had never admitted the full extent of her struggles. Later, when Emily and Aaron returned from school, Claire tried to salvage the day. She helped Emily with a history project and quizzed Aaron on multiplication tables. To lighten the mood, she put on some music while she baked a small batch of homemade cookies. The children laughed, enjoying the sweet treats despite the limited ingredients. "Mom, can we go to the park this weekend?" Aaron asked, crumbs on his lips. Claire offered a soft smile. "Sure, if the weather's nice." Emily clapped her hands. "Can we invite Dad too?" At that question, Claire's face faltered. She tried to keep her voice even. "Daddy is very busy, honey. But I'll ask him." A moment of silence followed before Emily spoke again. "Mom, I feel like Dad doesn't want to be here anymore. Does he hate us?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. She moved quickly to Emily's side and hugged her. "Never say that. Your dad loves you both very much. He has a lot on his mind." Even as she said it, she wondered if it was entirely true. Claire stayed up waiting for Edward, but midnight came and went with no sign of him. Around 1 a.m., she heard the distinct rumble of his car pulling into the building's parking lot. He staggered in, looking drained. She smelled a trace of expensive perfume on his jacket. "Edward," she began softly, "we need to talk." "Not now," he growled, walking past her to the bedroom. "I'm exhausted." She stood there in the dimly lit living room, arms folded across her chest. The next day, she would find a tiny, stray sequin on his jacket, something that definitely didn't come from her or the children's clothing. But for the moment, she simply felt overshadowed by his silence. In the bedroom, Edward collapsed on the bed, burying his face in a pillow. Beneath his frustration, a wave of guilt tugged at him. He recalled the earlier argument with the bank manager, who had refused an extension on his credit line. He remembered Lydia's last text message, demanding more money. He knew Claire was at her wit's end, trying to keep the household functioning. He was juggling too many lies, and deep down, he felt a spark of panic that everything might soon crumble. Yet he refused to stop. He told himself that if he just got this penthouse finished, Lydia would be satisfied, and he could find a way to fix things with Claire. He convinced himself it was only temporary. Outside their apartment window, the city lights flickered. Life went on below. Cars, music, voices in the night. Inside, Claire leaned against the closed bedroom door, tears spilling down her cheeks. On the other side, Edward lay awake in bed, heart pounding with silent regret. Their 2 children slept in a separate room, oblivious to the silent war waging in their home. They were a family struggling under the weight of secrets, a wife fighting to keep hope alive, children longing for their father's love, and a husband drowning in deceit and financial ruin. None of them realized how much more intense the conflict would become, or how soon the final confrontation would arrive, tearing the veil away from Edward's double life. Weeks turned into months. Edward's deception grew harder to maintain, and cracks began to form in the elaborate story he had woven at work, at home, and with Lydia. Edward's boss, Mr. Howard, was a sharp-eyed man who had built the company from scratch. He noticed that Edward's performance was slipping. "You've been late to meetings," Mr. Howard said one afternoon, beckoning Edward into his corner office. "You haven't closed a single major deal in weeks. What's going on?" Edward forced a confident smile. "I've got some personal issues, sir, but I'm handling them. I promise to pick up the slack." Mr. Howard frowned. "We all have personal issues. If you can't separate them from your work, there's going to be a problem. We need results." Edward swallowed. "Yes, sir. I'll make it right." But as he left the office, All he could think about was the phone call he'd received that morning from Lydia, demanding he make a payment to her interior designer. As he shuffled to his desk, he noticed co-workers exchanging glances, whispering in low tones. Rumors were spreading. Some said Edward was on the brink of financial disaster, others suggested he had a gambling problem. In truth, the money drain was mostly going toward Lydia and the penthouse, which still wasn't complete due to endless design upgrades. The cost soared, and the final invoice from the construction company loomed large. Edward tried to juggle payments, but his credit cards maxed out, and the bank threatened to freeze certain accounts. When Edward arrived at the site later that day, he found Lydia pacing angrily on the half-finished marble floors, while Mr. Chong stood to the side, visibly uncomfortable. "What is this?" Lydia snapped, pointing to a spot where the marble tiles didn't match perfectly in color. "I told you everything must be flawless. I will not tolerate second-grade craftsmanship." Edward's face turned red. "Calm down, Lydia. We can fix it." She let out a mocking laugh. "Fix it? Edward, I've told you 1,000 times that I only accept perfection. If you can't handle this, maybe I should find someone who can." Mr. Chong cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ms. Sterling, we can reorder the correct tiles, but it will take another 3 weeks and an additional cost for the custom cut. Are you sure you want to proceed?" "Of course," Lydia said, folding her arms. "I'm not going to live in a place with mismatched floors." Edward's head pounded. Another delay, more expenses. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Do whatever she wants." He was aware that, despite all his attempts to appear confident, the men at the site whispered that Edward might be in over his head. The bank calls and the repeated requests for more money had become common knowledge among the contractors. Meanwhile, Claire picked up the mail one afternoon, only to find a notice from the landlord about the rent increase. She had no idea how they would cover it, especially with Edward's sudden cutbacks on household spending. She felt a flicker of anger at Edward for being so dismissive and secretive. She tried calling him on his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent him a text, "We need to talk about the rent. They're increasing it again. Please call me." No reply came. When the children got home, Emily was crying. "Mom, I got made fun of at school today. They said we're poor and live in a run-down building." Claire's heart hurt. She had no comforting words beyond a soft hug and a promise that one day they'd find a better place. Aaron stared at them both, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He looked angry. "Why can't Dad help us move?" he demanded. "He promised us we'd get a real house." Claire forced a smile. "Your dad is trying," she lied. "He's very busy." That night, Claire decided she could no longer be passive. After Edward returned around 10 p.m., she waited for him in the living room. "You're still up?" he asked, sounding irritated. She nodded. "Yes, we need to talk. The landlord is raising the rent again. We can't afford to stay here unless we come up with more money." Edward stared at the floor. "I'll figure it out." "Figure it out?" Claire repeated, her voice trembling. "Our kids are suffering here." Emily came home crying because her classmates teased her. "We need more space, better conditions. This place is falling apart." Edward's jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that?" he snapped. "I'm under enough pressure at work. And what about this Lydia you mentioned before? You said she's just a client. But I get the feeling there's more." Edward's eyes flashed with panic. "Claire, drop it. I'm not discussing my work contacts with you." She didn't back down. "You leave at all hours. You come home with expensive cologne or perfume smells on your clothes. You lie to me about where you've been. I'm not a fool." They stood there, the tension thick in the small living room. Edward ran a hand through his hair. For a moment, Claire thought he might break down and tell her everything. Instead, he scoffed. "You know what?" he said, shaking his head. "I don't need this right now." Then he stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door. Claire sank onto the couch, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had never felt more powerless or alone. The next day, she decided to pick Edward up from work as a surprise, hoping maybe they could talk during the drive home. Arriving at the office building, She parked outside and waited. 15 minutes later, she saw Edward exit with a group of co-workers. One of them, a woman named Janice, looked at Claire's old car in the distance and whispered something to the man standing next to her. The man smirked, and Janice frowned sympathetically. Claire's stomach twisted. She realized people at Edward's office might know more than she did. Could they know about Lydia? Were they talking about how Edward was spending money on something other than his family? She felt humiliated, imagining them pitying her situation or even laughing behind her back. When Edward got in the car, he looked startled to see her in the driver's seat. "Claire, what are you doing here?" She forced a small smile. "I wanted to pick you up, maybe talk on the ride home." He sighed, leaning his head back against the seat. "I guess that's thoughtful." They drove in silence for a few minutes until Claire gently pressed, "Do you think we can set aside some time this week to look for a new place? Something better for the kids." Edward tapped his fingers on the door. "I told you, finances are tight. Let's not make rash decisions." "But Edward—" "Claire, drop it," he yelled, his outburst echoing in the car. She flinched, tears forming in her eyes. They didn't speak again for the rest of the journey home. As soon as they arrived, Edward grabbed his jacket and left again, saying something about meeting a client. Claire watched him go, heart pounding with a mix of fear and frustration. Edward's double life was crumbling. Lies and half-truths weighed him down. At night, he slept restlessly, dreaming of creditors, of Lydia storming out on him, or of Claire discovering the entire ruse. Each passing day, he lost more control. He made desperate phone calls to the bank, tried to shuffle money around, and promised Lydia everything under the sun just to keep her from leaving. But the tipping point was near. Fate, or perhaps karma, was already setting the stage for a dramatic fall, one that would expose Edward's secret to Claire, to Lydia, and to everyone who had watched him pretend to be a man of limitless means. Claire had reached her limit. The tension in the apartment weighed heavily on her each day. Edward was spending more nights away, leaving vague excuses or ignoring her texts altogether. She tried to manage the children's questions and maintain a calm home environment, but the burden was overwhelming. One afternoon, Claire decided to do some tidying while Edward was out. She needed a distraction from her worries. She started in the bedroom, folding Edward's shirts and organizing his sock drawer. That was when she noticed a folder tucked away beneath some clothes. It looked important, one of those official folders with a stamped company seal on the front. At first, she hesitated to open it. She didn't like the idea of snooping, but curiosity and desperation pushed her forward. Inside, she found documents that made her heart race, a contract for a luxury penthouse in Lydia Sterling's name. The pages detailed expensive materials, high-end fixtures, and a total cost that made Claire's head spin. She sank onto the bed, hands trembling. "He's building a luxury apartment for another woman," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The shock rippled through her system. This wasn't just a fling or a minor betrayal. It was a grand, elaborate project funded by their family's finances, or at least finances that Edward should have been using to support them. Claire felt rage, sorrow, and heartbreak all at once. Her worst suspicions had been confirmed in the most blatant way. The folder even contained a payment schedule, lists of high-end brands, and references to meeting with an interior designer. She swallowed hard, flipping through the pages until she spotted the final purchase agreement. Lydia Sterling was listed as the primary occupant. A wave of nausea washed over Claire. She thought of Emily and Aaron, forced to grow up in that cramped apartment with broken utilities while Edward built a palace for another woman. Her hands shook so violently that she had to set the folder aside. For a moment, she just sat there, stunned. Then, a cold resolve formed in her mind. She wiped her tears, placed the documents back into the folder, and carefully slid them into a hidden space under the bed. She knew Edward might come looking for them eventually, but she planned to move them to a safer spot soon. Claire paced the apartment, mind racing. She thought about calling Edward right away to confront him, but realized he would just lie or try to twist the truth. She considered packing up the children and leaving that same day, but she had barely any savings. And then the anger surfaced again. She wasn't going to let him keep his lavish life going while she ran off penniless. No, she needed a plan. She wanted to secure her children's future first. She grabbed her phone and dialed her mother, who lived 2 states away. "Mom," Claire whispered, struggling to keep her voice steady, "I need help. It's Edward. He's been unfaithful. Worse than that, he's been using money for something else." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I might need a place to stay for a while. I'm not sure yet." Her mother's voice crackled with concern. "Of course, honey. You and the kids are welcome here anytime. I had a feeling something was off. Tell me what you need." Claire felt a wave of relief. "Thank you. I just need a bit of time to figure out the next steps. I'll call you soon." She ended the call, tears of gratitude mixing with her heartbreak. At least she had one lifeline. Over the next few days, Claire remained outwardly calm when Edward was around. She pretended not to suspect anything, but in private, she gathered all the evidence she could: bank statements, suspicious receipts, text messages he forgot to delete. She compiled a neat stack of proof, each paper fueling her determination. She even managed to discreetly search online for information about Lydia Sterling. She found pictures of a beautiful young model, smiling confidently at red carpet events. Seeing Lydia's glamorous photos stung, but it also solidified Claire's resolve. "He thinks he can juggle both of us," she muttered bitterly. "He has no idea who he's messing with." When she could no longer bear her secrets alone, Claire confided in her neighbor, Mrs. Harris. It happened on a mild afternoon as they both sat outside the building, watching the sunset. "Claire, dear, you look pale," Mrs. Harris said. "Are you sure you're all right?" Claire took a shaky breath. "I'm not, Mrs. Harris. I found out Edward is building a luxury apartment for another woman. He's cheating on me. And we're here, struggling. I'm scared, and I don't know how to move forward." Mrs. Harris's eyes widened. She placed a comforting hand on Claire's arm. "Oh, my dear, I am so sorry to hear that. You don't deserve this. Have you confronted him?" "Not yet," Claire said, tears threatening to spill. "I'm scared he'll take away the little we have left, or that he'll blame me for snooping." "Listen to me," Mrs. Harris said firmly. "You have to protect yourself and your children. Get your finances in order, collect all the proof of his wrongdoing, and if necessary, seek help from a lawyer. Don't give him the upper hand." Claire nodded, grateful for the support. "You're right. I need to be strong for Emily and Aaron." Mrs. Harris squeezed Claire's hand. "You are stronger than you think." By the time Edward returned home that night, Claire had hidden the incriminating folder behind a row of books in their cramped closet. She pretended to be busy cooking dinner. Edward barely acknowledged her, lost in his own world of worry. He had spent the day trying to secure another loan, failing miserably, and now faced Lydia's texts demanding more money for furniture she insisted they needed. Yet he noticed something different about Claire, an undercurrent of resolve that wasn't there before. She served dinner quietly, avoiding prolonged eye contact. The children, sensing tension, ate in subdued silence. After dinner, Edward muttered an excuse about going for a drive. Claire let him go without argument. She remained in the kitchen, wiping the counter until it shone. Her mind buzzed with her plan: gather the evidence, talk to a lawyer, ensure she and the kids had a safe place to go if Edward turned hostile. As Claire turned off the kitchen light, she paused by the window, gazing out at the city's flickering lights. She placed a hand over her heart, breathing slowly. "I will not let him ruin us," she whispered to herself. "I promise, my children will not suffer because of his betrayal." Little did she know, fate was already accelerating events, drawing them all closer to the final storm. The secrets could not remain hidden much longer. Edward's life was on the verge of collapse, and Claire was about to become the catalyst that would shatter his illusions forever. One late afternoon, Edward and Lydia got into a fierce argument at the nearly finished penthouse. Lydia had shown up with 3 of her stylish friends, wanting to show off the space, but when she discovered that not all the custom fixtures had arrived, she lashed out. "You said everything would be installed by this week," she shouted, hands on her hips. Her friends pretended to be polite, but their eyes darted around, taking in the expensive surroundings. Edward tried to keep his voice calm. "There were delays with shipping. It's not my fault." She threw up her hands. I'm done with excuses. If I don't see a fully finished penthouse in 2 weeks, I'm out. And don't think I'll keep quiet about all the money you've poured into this place, either." Her threat was clear. Edward's heart pounded. His darkest fear was Lydia walking away after he'd spent so much. But he couldn't magically speed up the shipments. He needed more time, and more money. Before he could respond, Lydia stormed out with her friends in tow, leaving him standing on the gleaming marble floor, sweating through his suit. As if that confrontation wasn't enough, Edward's phone rang. The bank manager informed him that his accounts were dangerously overdrawn. They threatened legal action if he missed the next payment on his personal loan. He slammed his phone onto the kitchen island, letting out a frustrated growl. Mr. Chong, who had been overseeing the final touches in another room, stepped in cautiously. "Mr. Thornley, is everything all right?" the architect asked. Edward forced a stiff smile. "Just some personal matters. How soon can we have the rest of the fixtures?" Mr. Chong looked sympathetic. "I'll do what I can, but it will cost extra to rush the delivery." Edward closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Do it," he said in a low voice, though he had no idea where the money would come from. Later that same day, Claire found a letter slipped under the door. It was from the landlord, an eviction notice unless they paid the increased rent plus a penalty for late fees. Apparently, Edward had neglected to pay rent for the last 2 months, something Claire hadn't realized. She felt her stomach drop. 2 months, she whispered, eyes scanning the notice. "We're behind by 2 months?" The children were in the living room, watching a cartoon on the old TV set. Claire walked over, turned off the television, and knelt down next to them. "Listen carefully," she said gently. "We might have to stay with Grandma for a little while, okay?" Aaron's eyes widened. "Why? What's happening?" Emily looked frightened. "Is it because we don't have enough money?" Claire held them close. "We'll be okay. I promise. I just need you to pack a small bag with some of your favorite things. We'll leave soon." They both nodded, sensing the seriousness in her voice. As they went to their room, Claire grabbed her phone. She called Edward repeatedly, but he didn't answer. Finally, she sent him a text. "We got an eviction notice. Come home now." Edward arrived home late, his tie loose and eyes bloodshot. Claire waited in the living room, arms folded. The children were already asleep, their small suitcases packed and sitting by the door. "What's this about an eviction notice?" Edward snapped as soon as he stepped inside. Claire tossed the notice at him. "Explain why we haven't paid rent in 2 months." He glanced at the notice and scoffed, but Claire saw the panic flicker in his eyes. "I've been busy," he muttered. "Some payments got delayed." "Delayed?" she repeated, voice trembling with anger. "While you've been building a luxurious penthouse for Lydia?" His head jerked up. "What?" "Don't lie to me," Claire spat, stepping closer. "I found the contract. The penthouse is in Lydia Sterling's name. How could you do this to me? To our children?" Edward blanched, at a loss for words. For a moment, the tension in the room felt suffocating. Claire's voice rose. "We're being evicted because you spent everything on your mistress. Our kids don't have space to breathe or a proper bed to sleep in, while you're funding marble floors for her." Edward tried to defend himself. "It's not what you think." She cut him off. "I know exactly what it is. You've been lying to me, neglecting the children, and now we're on the brink of homelessness because of your selfishness." He swallowed hard. "Claire, let me explain." She hurled the pile of bank statements she'd gathered onto the couch. "Explain these. Eviction notice. Overdrawn accounts. Luxury brand purchases. Flights to fancy resorts. You think I'm stupid?" He raked a hand through his hair. "I never wanted it to go this far. But Lydia threatened to leave if I didn't keep up. And the bank." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "So you just threw us aside? Did you even think about Emily and Aaron?" Edward took a shaky step toward her, arms outstretched. "I messed up, Claire. I know. But I still love my family." She shook her head vehemently. "No. You don't get to say that after what you've done." She took a deep breath, struggling to control her anger. "The children and I are leaving tonight. I won't subject them to this madness any longer." Edward's face paled. "Where will you go?" "That's none of your concern," she hissed. "We'll be safe. That's all you need to know." He grabbed her arm, voice trembling. "Claire, wait. I can fix this. I'll cancel the penthouse deal." She snatched her arm away. "You should have thought about that months ago." With that, she headed to the children's room, waking them gently, urging them to put on their jackets. They walked to the door, suitcases in hand. Edward followed them, eyes filled with desperation. "Claire, please, I beg you. Don't take the kids away." She turned to him, tears brimming. "You left us long before this moment." They exited into the hallway, leaving Edward alone in the cramped apartment that felt colder than ever. The sound of the door closing echoed like a final verdict. Edward stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where his family had just been. A swirl of regret, panic, and sorrow flooded over him. In one fateful night, everything he had once cherished slipped through his grasp. He stumbled to the couch and sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. His phone buzzed once. Lydia's name flashed on the screen. He picked it up, voice hollow. "What?" he asked. Her tone was icy. "I heard you're having money troubles. If this apartment isn't finished soon, I'm done." Edward hung up, not knowing what to say. Lydia was slipping away too. He was left with nothing but ruin, financial, emotional, and personal. And though he didn't realize it yet, the worst was still to come. Claire's car rattled along the highway late that night, Emily and Aaron dozing in the back seat, their suitcases nestled beside them. She kept glancing at them in the rear-view mirror, her heart aching for what they were going through. But she also felt a newfound determination. She would protect them at all costs. After driving for several hours, she pulled up to her mother's house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The porch light was on, and her mother, Linda, stood at the door in a robe, arms folded against the cold. They helped the sleepy children inside. Linda set them up in a spare bedroom with an extra blanket, giving them each a comforting hug. Claire watched her mother tuck them in, a wave of relief passing over her. At least they were safe here. Once the kids were settled, Linda led Claire to the kitchen. She poured a cup of hot tea and set it in front of her daughter. "Now, tell me everything," Linda said softly, pulling out a chair. Claire did. She revealed Edward's affair with Lydia, the documents she found, the eviction notice. Her voice shook at times, tears slipping down her cheeks. Linda listened quietly, occasionally reaching out to squeeze Claire's hand in support. "So he's building a penthouse for another woman," Linda murmured when Claire finished. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Claire wiped her eyes. "I feel betrayed, humiliated. But more than that, I'm angry at how he treated the kids. We deserve better." Linda nodded. "You do. And you will find better. But first, we need to get you on stable footing." She patted Claire's hand. "You can stay here as long as you need. Tomorrow, we'll look into legal advice." The next day, Linda helped Claire schedule a consultation with a local attorney, Ms. Richardson. She was a no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, with a determined set to her jaw and kind eyes. Sitting in her modest office, Claire explained the situation. Ms. Richardson took diligent notes, occasionally asking questions about finances, the children's well-being, and Edward's whereabouts. "I want custody of my children," Claire said firmly. "He's proven he doesn't care about them. And I need some form of financial support, or at least a claim to any joint assets we have left." Ms. Richardson nodded. "Do you have proof of his mismanagement and affair?" Claire opened her bag and pulled out copies of the documents she had taken from the folder, along with a few incriminating emails. Ms. Richardson's eyes widened. "This is quite substantial," she said. "He's using marital funds to finance another property in someone else's name. That's definitely grounds for legal action. We can file for divorce and request an immediate hearing for temporary support." Claire's heart pounded. "I never thought it would come to this, but I don't see any other way." Ms. Richardson nodded, giving her a gentle smile. "You're doing the right thing for yourself and your children. We'll make sure he's held accountable." Back at Linda's house, Claire and the kids started to settle into a new routine. Emily and Aaron were enrolled in a nearby school, and though they missed their friends, they seemed to sense the calmer environment. Emily in particular seemed relieved, as if the tension that hung over their old apartment had lifted. Claire applied for a few part-time jobs. She had previously worked as an administrative assistant before having children, so she hoped her skills were still marketable. Her first interview was at a local insurance agency, a small operation that needed help with filing, phone calls, and scheduling. She dressed in her nicest blouse and borrowed slacks from Linda. Though she was nervous, she told herself that this was the start of a new chapter. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Teresa, seemed friendly. "We value people who are detail-oriented and good with customers," Teresa said. "You might have to learn some new software, but we provide training. Are you willing to start part-time?" Claire nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely." By the end of the interview, Teresa shook her hand and said, "We'll let you know soon, but I have a good feeling about this." As Claire walked out, she felt a tiny spark of hope. She was no longer helpless. She had her mother's support, a potential job, and a strong attorney on her side. The sting of Edward's betrayal was still there, but she now saw a path forward. That evening, she got a call from Marissa, the friend she bumped into at the grocery store months ago. Claire had sent her a text explaining her situation. "Claire," Marissa said, "I'm so sorry you've been going through this. Listen, my cousin owns a small daycare center in town. She's always looking for part-time help, especially in the mornings. You mentioned you loved kids. Are you interested?" Claire was touched by her friend's kindness. "Yes, that might be perfect. I'm already interviewing for an office job, but a daycare gig might work too, maybe in the afternoons." Marissa sounded relieved. "I'll pass along your info. Hang in there, okay?" For the first time in a long while, Claire ended the phone call with a genuine smile. She felt the community rallying around her, offering opportunities that Edward had never bothered to help her find. Late that night, after the children were asleep, Claire settled at the kitchen table in her mother's house. She wrote down a plan of action. 1. Finalize the divorce papers with Ms. Richardson. 2. Secure a job. 3. Save money for a place of her own. 4. Enroll the kids in extracurriculars once finances stabilized. She looked at the list, feeling both fear and excitement. She wasn't just running away from Edward, she was running toward a better life for herself and her children. Claire took a sip of tea, remembering the heartbreak of discovering Edward's infidelity. She couldn't control his actions, but she could control hers. In that moment, she resolved that she would never again be a bystander in her own life. Edward's betrayal had driven her out of the cramped apartment and into a world of uncertainty, but it had also awakened in her a fierce independence. She would stand her ground, fight for her kids, and demand the respect she deserved. No longer the timid wife waiting for her husband to come home, Claire was now a mother on a mission, a woman determined to reclaim her life. She felt the turning point in her bones, like the door to a new chapter had swung wide open. And there was no going back. Edward stared at the foreclosure notice pinned to his front door. The bank had finally taken action against the penthouse project, and creditors were after him for the outstanding balances. He had also defaulted on multiple personal loans. Worst of all, his boss, Mr. Howard, had just fired him for poor performance and questionable financial dealings. He was alone. The cheap apartment was empty. Claire and the kids had left weeks ago. He'd tried calling and texting her, but her messages were short and often routed to an attorney's phone number. She had made it clear that any further communication would go through legal channels. Desperate, Edward went to Linda's house unannounced one afternoon. Linda met him at the door, arms crossed and eyes cold. "You have some nerve showing up here," she said quietly. "I just want to see my kids," he pleaded. Linda didn't budge. "You can see them if Claire agrees. Right now, she's at work and they're at school. You should have called first." "I called Claire, but she won't answer," Edward insisted. Linda exhaled sharply. "That's because you've caused her enough pain. She's given everything to keep those kids safe while you've been out squandering money on your mistress. Edward flushed. I never meant for this to happen. He trailed off, realizing how hollow his excuses sounded. You should leave, Linda said, stepping back into the house and shutting the door firmly. Edward stood on the porch, the sting of rejection deep in his chest. With nowhere else to turn, Edward drove to Lydia's building. He parked outside and texted her, Please let me up. I need to talk. After a few minutes, Lydia appeared in the lobby, looking both annoyed and bored. What do you want, Edward? He ran a hand over his unshaven jaw. We need to figure out our finances. The bank is repossessing. She cut him off with a bitter laugh. Our finances? It was always your finances. I never signed up for bankruptcy. He stared at her, panic flaring. But the penthouse. You said you needed. She smirked, brushing a strand of perfectly styled hair off her shoulder. I found someone else who can finish the project. A developer with deeper pockets. Sorry, Edward, but your well has run dry. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. What about us? He whispered, voice cracking. She shrugged, eyeing him with contempt. There is no us. You were useful when you could pay. Now, you can't even cover your own bills, let alone my lifestyle. Don't contact me again. Without a backward glance, Lydia strode away, leaving Edward standing there in shock. All the effort, all the money, all the betrayals, wasted. Edward returned to the cheap apartment he once forced his family to live in. It was even emptier than before, unpaid bills littered the table, and eviction threatened him there as well. The building manager had already asked him to leave by the end of the month if he couldn't produce the overdue rent. He tried calling every contact in his phone for a loan or a job lead, but most of them had heard the rumors about his shaky finances and wanted nothing to do with him. Co-workers he once called friends wouldn't pick up, and Lydia's silence spoke volumes. Sitting on the ratty old couch, Edward stared at a photo of Claire and the kids, taken years ago at a theme park. They all looked so happy. A sob escaped his throat. He had traded his family for the illusion of excitement and prestige with Lydia, and now everything was gone. He realized, too late, how much he had hurt the people who truly mattered. Days passed, and Edward's situation deteriorated. He survived on cheap canned food, rarely left the apartment, and avoided calls from debt collectors. Occasionally, he'd shuffle outside to sit on the stoop, feeling the stares of neighbors who gossiped about his downfall. One evening, a notice was posted on the door. He had to vacate the premises in 3 days. He stuffed a few clothes into a duffel bag, but there was nowhere to go. He'd used up every favor, burned every bridge. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and tried calling Claire one more time. Voicemail again. He left a broken, tearful message. Claire, I'm so sorry. I lost everything. I know I don't deserve another chance, but please, I'm desperate. Tell the kids I love them. When he ended the call, he felt a crushing weight of loneliness. This was karma in its purest form. The man who had neglected his family and poured everything into a mistress's luxury dream was now left with neither a home nor a single shred of dignity. Edward thought about the cost of his choices. He'd ruined the life he once had, a wife who loved him, children who adored him, a steady job, and a decent, if modest, apartment. He had traded it all for a fleeting fantasy, which vanished the moment his money ran out. Now, he was paying the ultimate price. He spent that last night huddled on the couch, the lights turned off to save what little electricity he could afford. In the darkness, he faced the truth. He alone had orchestrated this downfall. There was no one left to blame. By morning, the building manager banged on the door, demanding Edward vacate. With his meager belongings in a bag, Edward stepped out into the cold hallway, each footstep echoing like a final verdict. He had fallen from his self-made throne into the rubble of his own making. And there, at the threshold, he understood that he had truly lost everything that mattered: family, home, and respect. The empty corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, offering no sanctuary, no place to call his own. Months later, Claire stood in front of a small, modest house on a tree-lined street. It was freshly painted, with a tiny garden out front. She clutched the keys in her hand. The children bounced excitedly around her. "Is this our new home?" Emily asked, eyes shining. Claire nodded, smiling. "Yes, it is. We can finally settle here." After the dust settled on her divorce proceedings, Ms. Richardson had helped her secure a fair settlement, such as it was. Though Edward had little left, the court acknowledged Claire's rights to certain marital assets. She also had a stable part-time job at the insurance agency, plus a side gig at Marissa's cousin's daycare a few afternoons a week. It was enough to get a small mortgage on a house of her own. Her mother, Linda, had also contributed part of her savings to help with the down payment. Emily and Aaron raced inside, exploring the empty rooms. Claire followed them, tears of joy and relief welling in her eyes. She recalled the cramped, broken-down apartment they once lived in, where she worried daily about rent and hot water. Now, they had a place that was theirs, a symbol of a new start. One day, Edward managed to contact Claire through Ms. Richardson's office, begging for a chance to see the children. Claire, after careful thought, decided it was best for the kids to meet him in a supervised setting, a family counseling office in town. When Edward walked in, he looked older, thinner, and utterly defeated. His clothes were wrinkled, and he hadn't shaved in days. Emily and Aaron clung to Claire, unsure how to react. The counselor, a gentle woman named Dr. Patel, guided them. "Emily, Aaron, your father would like to speak with you." Edward swallowed hard, tears brimming in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, kids. I failed you. I still love you more than anything." The children didn't leap into his arms or cry with joy. They simply nodded, exchanging uncertain looks. Claire stayed quiet, her expression guarded. "Can you forgive me?" Edward asked, voice shaking. Aaron shifted uncomfortably. Emily just whispered, "You hurt Mom." Edward's tears spilled over. "I know I did, sweetie. I can't undo that. But I want to make it better if I can." Claire stepped in softly. "That's up to them. And it'll take time. You haven't been around when they needed you most." Her voice was calm but firm. Dr. Patel facilitated a short conversation. The children expressed their hurt and confusion. Edward tried to assure them he would never abandon them again, though he had no stable home to bring them to. He was living in a small, run-down apartment he managed to rent with a tiny portion of his last savings. After the session, Emily and Aaron hugged him briefly, but the emotional wall between them remained. Edward looked at Claire, silently pleading. She gave him a polite nod, but no warmth showed in her eyes. A few weeks later, Edward's story made local news. The construction company filed a lawsuit for unpaid fees, and the bank listed the half-completed penthouse for auction. A local reporter sniffed out the scandal and ran a piece on "The Executive Who Lost It All," detailing how Edward Thornley spent family funds on a mistress's luxury apartment. People in the community whispered about him, and his old co-workers shook their heads, reminding each other of the cautionary tale. Edward found himself scorned wherever he went, a public figure of betrayal and downfall. Meanwhile, Claire's life continued to improve. She worked diligently at her jobs, balanced her budget, and managed to enroll Aaron in a soccer club and Emily in art classes. Their new house was small, but it was filled with laughter and growth. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, as Claire watered the little garden outside, she heard her phone buzz. It was a text from an unknown number, but she recognized Edward's style of writing. "Claire, I'm sorry for everything. I know you have no reason to care, but I just want to say I'm proud of you and hope the kids are doing well. Maybe one day they can forgive me." She stared at the message for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, she typed a short reply. "They're doing fine. We have a new home. Please respect our boundaries. I hope you find a way to rebuild your life." She hit send, feeling a mix of compassion and finality. She had moved on, forging a new path where Edward's chaos no longer dictated her every decision. The weight of his betrayal still lingered, but her future no longer belonged to him. Edward, living in a shabby studio apartment, continued to struggle. He took odd jobs, tried to rebuild his credit, and occasionally sent child support checks, when he could afford them. Some days, he stared at pictures of Emily and Aaron, the shame pressing down on him. He wondered if he would ever truly mend his relationship with them. But that was karma. He now lived in the cheap, run-down space he had once deemed good enough for his family. The difference was that Claire and the kids were gone, thriving in a new life he could only glimpse from afar. As for Claire, she woke each morning to birds singing in her little yard, her children healthy and happy. She felt pride in her own resilience, in the knowledge that she had overcome betrayal and heartbreak. Sometimes she remembered the naive hopes she once placed in Edward, but those memories served only as a reminder of how far she had come. Standing on her front porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, she felt gratitude. This was her karmic resolution. She had chosen herself and her children, leaving Edward to face the consequences of his actions. And in that choice, she had found a peace more valuable than any luxury penthouse could ever provide. I'm glad you made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed the story.